What's up, Night Owl? Steely here, back with another video, and today I'm going to be giving you a comprehensive guide on how to breed Temtem. Now, this guide is going to assume that you've never bred Temtem before, so if you have some experience with breeding, just bear with me while I get the basics out of the way. So let's start with where all the breeding is going to take place. This building here is the breeding center. I believe the sign says, Temtem Breeding Center. It's located on the island of Omninesia, and this is it on the map right here. Right next to the airship. Now, once you play through the campaign and you get to the second island, this is the second island, you'll have access to the breeding center almost immediately. So you can immediately start breeding. So if you haven't beaten the first dojo yet and gotten your surfboard, you have the breeding center to look forward to almost immediately after. If you go inside the building, you'll notice two NPCs, one on the left and one on the right. The NPC on the right sells items that you'll use for breeding. We're not going to worry about that right now. We'll get to that. We're worried about this guy on the left here. This guy on the left, you drop off two Temtem for breeding, and they'll produce an egg, which will show up in these two baskets here. Now, in order for your two Tems to produce an egg, they're going to need to check three boxes. For one, they need to be opposing genders. For two, they need to share a type. And for three, they both need to be fertile. And I'll explain fertility in just a second. Now, an important thing to note here, some Temtem will gain a new type upon evolving, which will open up new breeding possibilities. For example, a scale of type neutral cannot breed with a mushy of type toxic. However, if you were to evolve the scale into a scunch and you were to evolve the mushy into a mashuk, they both gain the melee type and therefore can breed. Now let's talk about the fertility score. Each Temtem has its own fertility rating, which is shown up here in the top right by this branch and the leaves coming off of it. Each leaf and the branch itself represents 1 point of fertility. Whenever two Temtem breed, each of them loses 1 point of fertility until the branch goes away and they're no longer fertile. For example, the scunch from earlier has a fertility rating of 6. That's 5 leaves in the branch itself. The mashuk has a fertility rating of 4, 3 leaves in the branch itself. If the two of these were to breed, each one would lose 1 point, dropping the scunch down to a 5 and the mashuk down to a 3. Once you have two compatible parents, the resulting egg will be of the lowest evolutionary line of the mother. So if our male scunch from earlier breeds with a female mashuk, the resulting egg will be a mushy. The fertility rating of the egg will be of the lowest parent's fertility rating after the -1 reduction. So if our scunch had a 5 fertility and the mashuk had a 3, our hatched mushy would have a 2 fertility rating, which is what the mashuks would be after that -1 reduction. Now let's talk about the techniques that your Temtem will hatch with. There are some techniques that a Temtem can only learn through breeding. And you can tell this by the little egg icon next to the technique's name. A mushy can only learn inner spirit through breeding, but as long as one parent has the ability, the resulting mushy will have it as well. Now let's talk about breeding for lumas. When an egg hatches, it has as much of a chance of being luma as a Temtem caught in the wild, unless one of the parents is a luma as well, in which case you have a 1 in 600 chance. If both parents are luma, you have a 1 in 60 chance. Now that you know how to produce eggs, I want to bring up a really important item for breeding, the egg timer. Once you activate an egg timer, it will allow you to see exactly how much time in seconds you have left on any eggs in your inventory. Now to get this, you're going to need to go to this location. This location here in Tukma, right next to the airship. You're going to go in this building and there's a Temtem connoisseur sitting on the bench. Talk to this NPC and he'll give you a quest to show him a bigu. If you do that, he'll give you the egg timer and you can start seeing the time left on your eggs. Now let's talk about the stats that your egg will hatch with. Each stat will pull from a pool of 3 numbers. In this case, HP can either be 20, 26, or 31. The 20 is coming from the lowest parent's HP, the 31 from the highest, and then the 26 is the middle. Now, when this egg hatches, it will have a 20% chance of being the lowest value, a 40% chance of being the median value, and a 40% chance of being the highest value. If both parents have the same value in a stat, then that child will have the same value in that stat. And if you're sharp, you probably realize that 2 perfect parents will produce a perfect child. Now let's talk about breeding items. The NPC on the right of the breeding center that I mentioned earlier sells items that you can give to your Temtem to hold when they breed in order to force specific stats to carry over to the child regardless of the other parent's stat. These items are one-time use, they are expended, and they can get pretty pricey. This is the expensive part of breeding. Each stat has an item associated with it that when it's held by a Temtem will pass along that Temtem's stat value to the child regardless of the other parent. There are 3 items that a parent can hold in order to pass along 2 stat values. Mighty DNA Strand, which passes along attack and special attack. Immunity, which passes defense and special defense. And Vigor, which passes along HP and stamina. You'll probably notice that speed is not represented here. This is what makes breeding kind of complicated. You have to plan around the fact that there's only 3 items that will pass 2 values, and you're trying to get the perfect stat of 7 values. I want to make an important note here. If you deposit a Temtem that's holding an item and you cancel the breed before an egg is produced, you will get that item back. So if you notice here, this Skunch is holding an aggressive DNA strand, which will pass along its measly 9 attack stat to this Mushy. If I select breed and let them go and then come back later to cancel it, as long as an egg hasn't been produced, I should get that item right back. So there you go, aggressive DNA strand. Now you know everything you need to know to start breeding. Next, we're going to go over the strategy that you'll use to get perfect Temtem. The first thing you want to do is you want to catch or trade a lot of the Temtem that you plan on breeding. Once you have a Temtem with a perfect of each stat, you're ready to start breeding. I wish that I could tell you that even with the perfect setup, you can get a perfect Temtem, but as long as the sex of the egg is left to RNG, there's a chance that you won't. I will tell you how to maximize your chances though, and preserve the most amount of fertility. And on that note, I recommend that you make sure to plan to have a child with the most fertility possible so that you have more rolls on the sex of the egg. Your goal with the first generation of eggs is to produce a Temtem for each stat group. That's a Temtem with a perfect HP and stamina, a Temtem with a perfect attack and special attack, and a Temtem with a perfect defense and special defense. You're also going to need multiple Temtem with perfect speed. The more the better, as you'll be able to preserve fertility. Once you have a Temtem with a perfect of each stat group and multiple Temtem with perfect speed, you're going to breed each stat group Temtem with a speed Temtem and transfer their perfect stats. The end result should be a perfect Temtem with HP, stamina, and speed, a perfect Temtem with attack, special attack, and speed, and a perfect Temtem with defense, special defense, and speed. Hopefully, one of those 3 Temtem is of a different sex than the other 2. If not, you're going to have to breed a 4th and hopefully end up with a different sex than the 3. Now you want to breed the Temtem with a different sex than the other 2 with the other 2 Temtem in order to produce an egg with 5 perfect stats. If you have the means to do so, I would recommend breeding a 4th Temtem for this generation anyway so that you can preserve fertility. Now that you have 2 Temtem with 5 perfect stats and each is missing a different stat group, you can use that stat group item to transfer the missing stats and produce a perfect egg. Hey, I hope you found the video helpful, and if you did, you know how YouTube works. Hit those buttons, leave a comment down below. Let me know if I left anything out of the breeding guide that you feel needs to be included. And be on the lookout for my next guide, which is a Temtem training guide. You can get those perfect TVs that you want. And as always, I'll see you at sundown.